Salmonati Academy is a gathering place for young people from all over the continent. Each student has their own ambitions and goals they want to achieve, so they come here to develop their potential. This place operates on a system where talent is supreme. Those who don't meet the requirements are ruthlessly eliminated. A person named Nosumu Bounties was one of the few students who could get into this special school. Currently, he has been here for 2 years. 5 years ago, he entered the academy with his childhood friends, leaving everything behind without regret to get here. His best friend since childhood was Lisa Hounds. Before entering the academy, Nosumu and Lisa were known as an inseparable pair. Their love story began one day when Lisa and her parents moved to Nozumu's small village. The village was located on the edge of a small country that had friendly relations with the neighboring kingdom. It was an ordinary agricultural village with fertile land, so they never lacked for food. However, each day passed slowly and tediously. There, Nosumu and Lisa met while Nosumu was trying to catch fish in the lake. Lisa suddenly asked him if he was okay, a little shy, with her fair face blushing in embarrassment. She asked Nosumu if he was free to talk, which also surprised Nosumu, who was flustered by Lisa's sudden question. Nosumu was a bit confused at first, so he asked again to see if he heard correctly. "You're asking if I'm free?" With a wide smile on his face. Lisa nodded, immediately confirming that Nosumu had heard right. It seemed Lisa really wanted to talk to Nosumu, so she said that if he didn't mind, she'd like to stay by his side and chat while he fished. Lisa introduced herself for the first time, saying she was very happy to meet Nosumu and hoped they could become friends. Lisa was a girl who had traveled with her mother for a long time. In contrast, her father had passed away unexpectedly, so her mother decided it was best to return to the small village to raise Lisa. After hearing Lisa say she had traveled a lot, Nosumu couldn't help but feel intrigued. Lisa went on to tell him more about herself. She said her father was an adventurer, and that adventurers were people who traveled all over the world. They became pioneers in exploring new lands, but this work often came with extreme danger. For Nosumu, at that time, he had no real desire to risk his life for adventures. However, being a boy, he was naturally drawn to stories of heroes from the past. So, the stories Lisa shared about her father captivated him greatly, and it could be said that Nosumu was also charmed by Lisa's grace. Although it was the first time they met, their relationship began like that of childhood friends. They lost all track of time sharing stories about heroes, not realizing how quickly time had passed. However, as they grew into their teen years, they became more than just friends. Then one day, Lisa told Nosumu that she had decided to enroll at Salmonati Academy. That sudden decision shocked Nosumu from every angle. He never imagined that Lisa would want to leave the village and become an adventurer like her father. So, instead of letting her face her struggles alone, Nosumu decided he would leave with Lisa. Hearing this, Lisa was deeply shocked, as she never thought Nosumu would abandon his family, who were from a normal farming background. And as an only child, he was irreplaceable in their eyes. Nosumu's father would probably fight him to the bitter end on this matter. However, in Nosumu's mind, if the girl he loved wanted to fulfill her dream, he would be her support and go with her. Lisa was very flustered at this point, as she never expected Nosumu to do that for her. But she felt so happy that she couldn't hold back her emotions, and she threw her arms around Nosumu in a tight hug. However, as time went on, they were now at the academy. The question is, are they still together? Ding dong, the school bell rang, waking Nosumu from his daydreams. They had opened this academy, built through the cooperation of all government bodies across the continent. Each government funded the school as a way to prevent future disasters. The academy accepts anyone willing to join, regardless of social status. It's all based on scores. If someone works hard or has natural talent, they can absolutely stay, as long as they meet the minimum requirement. If a student graduates, they are guaranteed a comfortable, prosperous life. However, if they start to fall behind in their classes, as Nosumu was now, they are treated like outcasts. Nosumu remembered that he used to be at the top of his class, But now he was looked down upon by his peers. Everything depended on your social status. The social right to be in the academy was based on your scores, which were displayed on magical nameplates. The black nameplate was the lowest rank, standing at 10th place. Currently, Nosumu possessed such a nameplate, so his friends were looking at him with contempt, wondering why he was still in school when he was essentially a dropout. Although Nosumu heard all the insults clearly, he chose to ignore them, knowing they would affect his mood. As he entered the classroom, his classmates started mocking him again, asking why he didn't just give up. They blamed him for making the whole class look bad. Even though Nosumu knew he couldn't take much more, he remained calm and patient, not wanting to cause a scene he would later regret. One of his classmates, Mars Dickens, was the type of person everyone feared because of his arrogance and conceit. He was a student who had been held back due to his volatile temper. He always tried to pick a fight with anyone he could provoke, regardless of their rank. And now, with Nosumu being the lowest-ranked student, he became Mars's main target. Mars continued his daily routine of endlessly mocking and insulting Nosumu. He tried to taunt him, saying it seemed the little boy, as everyone called Nosumu, didn't want to talk. Mars's friends agreed that the boy didn't want to communicate, not even with his childhood friend, the red-haired princess who had now abandoned him. But Nosumu just remained silent, trying to avoid them as much as possible. This silence only enraged Mars further, and his group was on the verge of beating Nosumu up. However, before they could lay a hand on him, a man named Mr. Henry Barr appeared. Asking the group of thugs what they were doing, Mars argued that they were just giving Nosumu some advice on how to improve. But Mr. Henry said he didn't care about that, as long as they did it after school, because they were wasting his precious time. Mr. Henry then ordered Mars to return to his seat. However, it seemed Mars didn't like the way Mr. Henry spoke, so instead of listening to the teacher, he talked back, which made Mr. Henry furious. Despite that, Mars continued to insult the teacher, even saying that Mr. Henry must be stressed from being considered a black-rank teacher for so long, which made him abnormal. Mr. Henry tried to contain his anger. Instead of making a scene, he just told Mars to come to his office after class. But for now, they would continue with the lesson. Mr. Henry began to speak about magic, as everyone in the class knew that magic is the process of awakening one's own spiritual power. By training one's spiritual power, one can force magical elements to surface and manifest to create various effects. Magic can not only be used to enhance the body, but can also affect the world around it. Specific elements can be used to create spells for one's benefit. When using magic that affects the surrounding world, a large amount of magical elements is often used, and this is called ritual magic. Originally, they used ritual magic as a form of offering to the gods to receive rain for their crops. However, ritual magic is only one of two modern magical methods. The other method is called chanting magic. It is used as a source to form magic, but that meant Mr. Henry would discuss ritual magic more in the next session. They would be conducting experiments with different catalysts to create specific magical results, so he told everyone to be prepared. However, it seemed he didn't want Nosumu to participate in this activity. Mr. Henry declared that Nosumu would be exempted from participating because he was just a black-rank student, so it would only be a waste of time if he joined. Despite this, Nosumu insisted that he would still participate no matter what, so Mr. Henry allowed it. But he had to stand on the sidelines so as not to get in the other students' way. The constant mistreatment of Nosumu continued with no signs of stopping. Nosumu couldn't help but compare himself to Lisa, who was now considered the red-haired princess. Lisa had earned that nickname thanks to her excellent scores at the academy. She quickly rose to the top with no one to stand in her way. Meanwhile, Nosumu, who was once her lover, couldn't keep up with her excellence. However, he couldn't meet the expectations everyone had for him. He wasn't naturally studious, nor had he ever held a sword before entering the academy. He didn't have the same drive as Lisa. Nosumu didn't realize how demanding the requirements to enter the school were. It was no surprise that he fell behind so quickly, especially when the expectations were so unreasonable. But he never gave up. Even though he was struggling, he kept trying. Because at the end of the day, he didn't want to quit. He had friends and a lover who were willing to help. Most of all, he wanted to keep his promise to Lisa that he would always support her. That's why he aimed to become stronger. However, that didn't matter anymore. Then something happened to Nosumu. He couldn't improve his abilities any further, as if a huge weight had been placed on him. His growth came to a sudden halt. The people around him became increasingly hostile, to the point of bullying him every day. However, Lisa still stood by him. She increased their training time together, hoping he would start improving again. Lisa decided to be by his side at all times, which made him try harder than ever. The summer before their first year at the academy, they grew closer than ever. But suddenly, everything ended. One day, Lisa just said she wanted to end things with Nosumu. He was completely shocked to hear that, as he never thought something like this could happen. After all, she had never shown any disappointment in him. Suddenly, a rumor spread through the school that he had cheated on Lisa with another woman. Of course, he denied all the accusations, as he knew he would never do that to Lisa. However, no one believed him. They called her the red-haired princess because of her beauty and talent, while he was just a failure with no future. As the rumors spread, people treated him like he was just trash. He had no friends left, no one to confide in. On the contrary, many others joined in on bullying him, with some even resorting to physical violence. He tried to talk to Lisa, but she just looked at him with cold, hateful eyes. But he still diligently attended every class and trained until he could no longer move. He wanted to keep his promise. Then one day, his world shattered into pieces when he saw his childhood friend, Ken, start dating Lisa right after she broke up with Nosumu. Ken and Nosumu were both of the same rank, but while Nosumu remained calm and gentle, Ken had the fastest growth in recorded history. He often joined in on training sessions with him and Lisa. Nosumu felt his heart break as he watched Lisa smiling brightly beside another boy, even if it was just during training. But the two of them dominated every other pair in the mock battles. In that moment, Nosumu realized that he no longer had a place in her heart. Tomorrow, the mock exams will begin. Mr. Henry will assign the pairs for the test, and he clearly stated that he doesn't want to hear any violent reactions. He also informed everyone that they could use ki, an Eastern-style magic, focused on improving the body's movements and physical strength. While magic requires divine power to create effects, both forms are common on the continent of Arkmil. The city of Arkazam was built around Solomonadi Academy, which is the center for magical research. All ancient magic excavated from ancient ruins is sent here to be studied and passed on to the students. As fate would have it, Nosumu was stuck with Mars as his partner. But before the match begins, let's look at some interesting information. The Academy's uniform is designed for combat and has some basic enchantments woven into it. However, it's not uncommon for students to wear an extra layer of protective armor. Nosumu didn't wear any extra protection. The weapon he chose was a unique sword from his village. He told himself that even without good magic skills, he could at least showcase his combat abilities. He always tried to cover his weaknesses with a rare, powerful sword. And yet, despite his efforts to win the match against Mars, he still found himself in the school infirmary, covered in scars. Fortunately, the school's doctor, Norn Altina, and Mr. Henry Varr, his 10th grade teacher, genuinely cared about him. Although he wanted to talk to them, Nosumu decided to leave and continue his daily routine, which was to visit the forest. Mr. Henry was very worried about Nosumu's safety, but there was nothing they could do, as it was his choice to go to the forest alone. It is said that due to an incident, Nosumu fell to the bottom of his class and was always ridiculed. It all started with an ability he discovered in his first year. He has a suppression ability, a rare power. It didn't benefit him at all. On the contrary, it was a severe hindrance. Every person affected by this ability practically received a permanent buff. But for Nosumu, what was suppressed within him was his own physical strength. Therefore, Mr. Henry and Dr. Norn were very worried about Nosumu's well-being. They just hoped that he could find something he was good at as soon as possible, before his body completely gave out. Considering he was going to the forest alone, they hoped he would finally find something that only he could achieve. Spasm Forest is in the city where Solmanati Academy is located. It is a deep forest that surrounds Arkazam, where many types of trees grow. A rich forest can be a blessing for people, but often, the richness of the forest is also home to powerful beasts. There are students and ordinary citizens who make a living by hunting monsters and gathering resources in this forest. Every year, at least a few people die or go missing in this forest, never to be found again. The large city of Arkansas was built about 10 years ago, with the academy at its center. To the north are the government offices. The eastern area is the civilian district. The southern area is considered the main commercial district. And finally, the western area contains all sorts of artists and workshops. There is a highway that runs through this area. And the rest of the surrounding region is a dense forest, known as Spasm Forest. This forest is famous for having many of the continent's beasts, but deep within it lives an old woman named Chino. Chino is Nozumu's secret master. Before the city was built, she traveled into this forest to continuously hone her skills. Now, she is a master who is guaranteed to teach Nosumu the best techniques. She keeps all her comments and advice practical, not wanting to be biased towards Nosumu. Chino's first encounter with Nosumu was when she was in a rather dangerous part of the forest. As she looked around, the sound of a swinging blade caught her attention. That's when she saw him training all alone. Naturally, she was very curious and approached him, but she quickly realized that Nosumu was terrible. He's destroying himself just to earn respect from others. She thought it must have been cruel to make him act so desperately. Seeing those dull, lifeless eyes, she was reminded of a starving beggar on the verge of death. Then, a flesh-eating dog appeared, forcing Chino to come out of the shadows and help Nosumu once and for all. It had been about 1.5 years since that day, and Chino had been trying to train Nosumu ever since. Now, he had become a true monster. Although that skill was considered basic, a true master could turn even the most fundamental skills into the deadliest of weapons. A master like Chino could destroy any enemy with just that skill, powerful enough to slice through an iron pot as if it were paper. However, Nosumu's blade wasn't as powerful as hers, but it was just as sharp and solid. To compensate for this weakness, she had him focus on sword technique instead of power control. Although the abilities she taught him were focused and powerful, they first had to build up his body's physical strength. Otherwise, he would just be defeated by anyone he fought. What do we live and become strong for? Nosumu's mind had been broken before. It was clear he was running from reality by training so recklessly. It was also easy to see that he was trying to escape from himself. Chino could rest easy now, knowing she had left him with everything she had learned over the years. If she were to leave him, she'd at least know that he could escape the shackles that bound him to the person he was today. Back in the forest, it seemed Nosumu was in a very dangerous situation. Currently, demon bears were appearing all over the area. Demon bears don't usually travel in pairs, so it was likely the ones we see now are brothers. Their characteristic red fur was unmistakable. Not only that, but it was said their flames were as intense as any shield. These kinds of monsters were definitely not something anyone would want to fight alone. For someone like him, it would take at least 5 people to deal with something like that. But luckily, there was someone by his side now, so things would be okay. Nosumu had seen this girl fight before, and it seemed she was in the same year as him. She was known as the Midnight Princess, thanks to her hair, which was as black as the midnight sky. This girl was none other than Iris Dina Franzchild. On the other hand, there was Thelma Line, a powerful witch famous in the academy. Her power alone surpassed the teachers in terms of magical strength. One of them cast a spell called Wind Vortex. To destroy the demon bears, Wind Vortex is a magic spell that creates a whirlwind capable of slicing through opponents. This type of spell is considered intermediate-level magic. With this power, Thelma was also known by the title Minstrel of the Four Winds. Iris Dina Franzchild and this famously weary yet powerful witch were currently at the top of the academy. Just watching them fight left Nosumu in awe. He began to wonder how much power the girls had used to defeat that monster, and how truly powerful their techniques were. Even without any variation or chi enhancement, that suggested they must have immense magical power. Nosumu figured it was the raw power of their magical abilities. How could a power be so strong? He wondered to himself. Suddenly, as Nosumu tried to hide from the girls as much as possible, a monster leaped out from somewhere, forcing Nosumu out of his hiding spot. Just as they were trying to fight the monster, Iris immediately cast a spell, and witnessing this made Nosumu think that Iris truly had a unique ability, allowing her to unleash attacks and spells without incantations. As Iris was casting her spell, Nosumu rushed in to slash the last beast. It seemed they hadn't realized there were actually 3 bears in the group. After Nosumu sliced the bear in 2, it seemed Iris and Thelma were just as surprised as he was. Nosumu panted from exhaustion, as he never thought he'd fight something like that. He didn't know why his body had acted the way it did, but he couldn't question it now, as there was only a moment to act. In the end, this was no different from when he used his phantom blade. However, in terms of power, his master was on a completely different level than him. Even so, her abilities shouldn't be underestimated. Due to his own abilities being suppressed, everything he did was weak. Not only that, but his body was still at its limit, as he had just been in a mock battle with his master before things got serious. Nosumu apologized for not paying attention and thanked the girls for their help. Iris immediately checked to see if he was hurt. Nosumu assured her that everything was fine, but Iris's beauty made him feel a little flustered. In return, Iris also expressed her gratitude for Nosumu's help, because thanks to him, she and Thelma were now safe. The 3 of them then introduced themselves to each other, and it turned out they were all in the same class. While Iris was certainly the friendly one, Thelma was more shy and reserved. Nosumu tried to act relaxed and normal in front of the girls to make them feel at ease. Iris then apologized for Thelma's behavior. Nosumu assured her that everything was fine and that he didn't mind at all. However, when Iris opened up to Nosumu and said she thought he was also a student at the academy, Nosumu started to sweat nervously. He felt that if the girls knew who he was, they would treat him as harshly as everyone else at the academy. So, he tried his best to avoid saying his name, but not saying his name was truly impolite. Moreover, Iris's family was one of the prominent founding families that helped build Arkhazam. Her father served directly under the royal court, specifically as a longtime advisor to the kingdom of Fersina. Although quite afraid of what would happen next, Nosumu decided to reveal his true identity to the girls. He started by saying he was a second-year student in the 10th rank class, and then said his full name. There was a slight silence afterward, but Nosumu didn't expect the girls' reaction to be what it was. Iris simply said that she believed Nosumu, but also pointed out that it seemed a bit suspicious for a 10th rank student like him to be out here alone. Iris asked him about his party. Nosumu's response left both girls, Iris and Thelma, in complete shock. They, the most capable students, couldn't believe what they had just heard. These are ranks assigned to adventurers on the continent of Ark's Mill, which can be considered an assessment of a person's skills. Generally speaking, if someone was A rank, they could be a top marksman, a knight in the King's Guard, or a court magician. Some might also be highly skilled in non-combat roles, like economics or as a military strategist. Only 5 special students were approved by the school as A-rank students in their second year, with Thelma and Iris being 2 of those chosen. Even those of the highest rank respected the danger of facing a demon beast. Moreover, no one wanted to work with someone like Nosumu. However, Iris didn't think so, because students like Nosumu, who were capable of surviving in the wild, were extremely rare. But despite all that, Nosumu was alone in the deepest parts of the forest. Iris wanted to know if there was a reason for that. Nosumu simply said that he came to the forest to train because he knew he could become stronger, even if just by a little. But he also realized that he needed to become as strong as everyone else. And that didn't mean he was going to just give up and die. That was why, despite the difficulty, he would do his best to train, even if it meant facing danger alone. Hearing this, Iris and Thelma were surprised. As the awkward atmosphere began to fade, Nozumu tried to apologize for unloading on the two girls. Iris then apologized for prying so much into the matter and asked the two of them about their plans in the forest. Iris explained they had received a request from the guild. According to reports, there was information about some dragons appearing in this forest. Dragons were considered mythical creatures, if not one of the most powerful beings in existence. They are a species of immense power. It's said that in ancient times, they ruled over all other creatures in the world. Furthermore, if someone were to slay a dragon, they would be granted its power. Iris went on to explain that no one really took the rumor seriously, but they couldn't just let a rumor about dragons go uninvestigated, just in case there really was one lurking somewhere. Regardless, dragons were still a type of demon beast that people should fear. No matter their size, their attacks could still pose an undeniable threat. If the beast that was reportedly sighted was indeed a dragon, then according to the report, this one was relatively small in size and highly intelligent. For that reason, half-baked heroes wouldn't stand a chance. However, Iris told Nosumu that wasn't what they should be worrying about. Right now, he should focus on gathering as many materials from beasts as he could to sell. As they parted ways, Thelma informed Iris that Nosumu was the person everyone on campus was talking about. However, Iris didn't think he was the type of person to do such terrible things. She didn't see that in him. Regardless, Thelma was simply scared. Meanwhile, Nosumu had finally arrived at his master's house in the forest. Shino was definitely in a bad mood since Nosumu had arrived later than expected. The next day, Master Shino intensified his training regimen. Meanwhile, back in the city, Iris couldn't get Nosumu off her mind. She couldn't believe he was so skilled with a sword and felt that she could never become as good as him. She greatly admired the fact that Nosumu wasn't afraid to be alone in the dense forest, and this made Iris wonder what kind of person he truly was. The next day at noon, the sun was shining brightly, and Nosumu loved it. He returned to campus, as it was another school day, despite the scorn from the other students throughout the academy, which made him feel uncomfortable among the large student body. I really didn't want to eat alone in the park, but the school cafeteria was much worse. On top of that, it seemed Nosumu was having financial troubles, which meant he had to live off whatever he could hunt. This morning's training had also been twice as intense, so he didn't have much energy left to make a proper lunch. When he got back to his dorm, he took a bite of some crusty bread and tried to console himself that things could be worse. While he was eating, he happened to come across some students from Iklos. Iklos was a feeder school directly affiliated with Solmonati Academy, focusing on younger students, usually around 10 years old. The school's purpose was to find children who showed signs of talent early on and develop their abilities. The students chosen for this school were often the children of high-ranking officials. Typically, their children were gifted in some area. However, one student Nosumu came across was rather small compared to the other children at Iklos. Even though he told himself not to think too much about it, he suddenly remembered someone who looked exactly like the little girl. Nosumu asked the little girl what she was doing all alone in the forest. The little girl explained that she was playing with a cat named Shadow, but the cat had snatched something of hers and run up a tree, and now she couldn't get it back. Nosumu decided to help the little girl get her bracelet back. However, the tree was quite tall and the wood was very slippery, making it difficult to climb, even for him. But he figured he should give it a try. In the forest, being able to climb tall trees to escape monsters was crucial. Fortunately, climbing trees was Nosumu's specialty, so he tried to reach for the bracelet. Suddenly, the cat became aggressive, knocking Nosumu to the ground. Now both hungry and annoyed, Nosumu became even more determined to get the bracelet back from the cat, no matter what it took. In the end, they fought each other until both Nosumu and the cat fell to the ground. And finally, the little girl got her bracelet back. The little girl then introduced herself, saying her name was Samaliana, but everyone usually called her Somiya. Nosumu introduced himself as well. Somiya thanked Nosumu relentlessly, which made him feel a bit flustered. Since it had been a long time since anyone had thanked him like that, Somiya said goodbye and ran off towards the school campus, leaving Nosumu alone and having missed his lunch, but he figured it didn't really matter. Ritual magic is one of the most ancient forms of magic, so if someone listens carefully and follows the instructions, they shouldn't have any problems. However, if they are completely inept when it comes to magical ability, it can prove to be difficult. During one activity, Master Henry showed the class an example of a magical altar. Now, each student would create their own. Once they constructed their altar, they had to follow verbal incantations to release magical power into its center. The spells would generally be as powerful as the summoner's natural magical ability. The magic would manifest based on the spell they desired. Whether it was a brilliant light or a storm of water, it would react accordingly. The precision of the magic circle was also related to the summoner's technique. Seeing the students, Nosumu felt a distinct difference between himself and them. Among all the students, Mars was fortunate to be proficient in both K manipulation and magic to a fairly high degree. Normally, a person's abilities would lean toward either ki or magic. It was rare to see a balance like in Mars's case. Very few people excelled in both fields. However, using both simultaneously was an even rarer occurrence. Since Nosumu suffered from his suppressed abilities, he didn't actively participate in the magic lectures, as he couldn't produce any magical skills. Since his first year, he had sat out of all the magic lessons. But because he was often absent from class, Nosumu tried to make up for lost time by attending the sessions. He only showed up in class to maintain appearances, so as not to get any more bad marks on his record. Salmanati Academy focused on students with talented abilities, so they enjoyed more benefits. The higher their ability, the more preferential treatment they would receive. High-ranking students would receive a larger supply of provisions from adventurers when they went on missions. As Nosumu watched his classmates perform their magic, he saw Iris facing off against his ex-girlfriend Lisa. Usually, there was a huge gap between classes of different skill levels and where they practiced. While he was just a rank 10 second-year student, he had hoped he wouldn't run into Lisa again. It had been over a year since he last saw her. They had once promised each other a future, but now the only thing he could do was quietly watch her from a distance. Lisa was now charging toward Iris with all her strength, trying to gain an advantage in the match. However, it seems like Iris could counterattack by quickly summoning virtual bullets. Nosumu was surprised to see Iris calmly standing her ground, withstanding Lisa's terrifying power. Iris used her natural abilities to evade Lisa's precise and deadly attacks. Nosumu thought that Lisa surely had the advantage in this fight, as she wielded her sword with confidence. But did Iris stand a chance? Then, Iris suddenly attacked with her sword, while still being able to summon spells, without any incantations. But Lisa was also countering Iris's attacks. This was definitely a match between the two top-ranked students. They continuously clashed, neither backing down. Lisa's attacks generated powerful gusts of wind around the arena, and she created illusions of herself while attacking. This was clearly an intense battle. Then, Lisa used one of her spells, something that not even the strongest mages could perform. The attack was so powerful it was almost on par with Thelma's Cyclone. The attack was incredibly powerful, and Nosumu began to wonder how Iris was so strong. However, it seemed Iris wasn't one to be easily defeated. Lisa asked her how long she had been preparing that attack. Iris replied that she'd been preparing it since the start of the match. She explained that due to Lisa's violent attacks, it took her extra time to prepare. She needed to focus on the battle. Otherwise, Iris could have already defeated Lisa. Hearing this, Lisa felt a sense of joy, knowing that the fight was just as difficult for Iris. Meanwhile, Iris was thinking to herself that she should have been able to summon the attack sooner. Normally, it takes her about 10 seconds to summon it, but for Nosumu, it doesn't even take a second. Iris wondered how he was able to do that. Iris was about to greet Nosumu, but it seemed like he was intentionally ignoring her. This made Iris even more curious about him. She asked Thelma more about this guy, Nosumu. Iris knew that Nosumu was heartbroken once again, seeing his ex-girlfriend with his best friend. He began to ask himself why he couldn't be stronger. Why couldn't he overcome the pain and move on? Why couldn't the thoughts endlessly swirling in his mind just stop? Nosumu tried to ask a series of questions that he himself didn't know the answers to. He had developed a habit of training hard to make up for his shortcomings, but his emotional moment was interrupted when Somiya leaped into the scene, catching Shadow before it hit the ground. Nosumu had managed to save her, so Somiya asked to see him again to show her gratitude. She said she couldn't meet him after school, so they should meet during lunch. This made Somiya very excited, and Nosumu didn't even get a chance to say anything about it. That evening, Somiya was practicing her magic, but it seemed she felt she still wasn't as good as her older sister, who turned out to be Iris. Iris then offered some advice, saying that she should try to focus on her pacing when casting spells. Light magic required a lot of energy to work, however, it would gradually decrease as she released the spell and chanted properly. As long as Somiya figured out how to control her own magic, she would improve. She could definitely do well in magic. After they had discussed the advice, Iris noticed that Somiya had been very happy for the past few days. Somiya then shared that she had met a boy whom she called a friend. Iris also told her sister about the boy she had started to develop feelings for. However, neither of the sisters knew that they were talking about the same person. Somiya wanted to ask more about this special boy, but Iris stopped her, saying she was still too young to be talking about that. Iris said they should focus on getting to know the boys more and talk about them later. Meanwhile, Somiya went to her room to sleep. Iris was then left to think about how Nosumu had become like this. But for now, what she hoped for the most was to learn more about what had really happened, because Nosumu wasn't like what everyone was saying about him. The next day, Nosumu and Somiya met as planned. They were able to talk with each other. Somiya also mentioned that the bracelet that Shadow was always trying to snatch from her was very important, as it was a gift from her older sister. Nosumu then invited her to lunch, but Somiya said she would be having lunch with her sister that day. Soon after, Iris appeared, finally finding where Somiya was. Nosumu and Iris were both quite shocked to see each other in that unexpected moment. When Somiya saw her sister Iris, she immediately jumped for joy. Iris then told Nosumu that she was a little surprised, as she never thought he would be the new friend her sister was talking about. In turn, Nosumu was just as surprised as Iris. At that moment, Nosumu began to realize that Somiya's bracelet wasn't something a normal person could easily obtain, and she had mentioned that her sister was in the same year as him, and their black hair was almost identical. There was no doubt about it. They were really sisters. Thinking about all of this left Nosumu quite shocked, as he never thought something like that would happen. With that, since Somiya and Iris were having lunch together that day, Iris invited Nosumu to join them to make things more fun. However, it seemed Nosumu was a bit shocked, as he never thought Iris would invite him. After all, she had it all, a beautiful face and the calm demeanor of a goddess. She was very reliable and always helped those in need. She was adored by the other students. Nosumu was sure she received countless dinner invitations compared to a good-for-nothing like him. That was why he couldn't think of a reason she would want to have lunch with him. If they were in a more crowded area, the news would have spread throughout the school in minutes. For that very reason, before the rumor could start spreading like wildfire, Nosumu immediately turned down Iris's invitation, saying he would have to pass. However, it seemed Somiya was very determined to have lunch with him. So Iris decided they would have lunch in the forest, away from the crowded areas. There, they could talk about school. Nosumu asked Iris about Thelma, who was supposedly at Professor Jihad's office. Jihad Randall was the headmaster of Salmonati Academy. He had fought on the front lines in the war against the demons that took place 20 years ago. He was considered one of the strongest swordsmen in the world. The Great Demon Migration occurred in the land of Ark Mill 20 years ago, starting in the northeastern part of the continent and later escalating into a disaster known as the Great Invasion. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed during the invasion, leading to a wave of refugees seeking shelter in neighboring countries. It was the first time in history that all nations had come together to cooperate. They sent large armies to deal with the demon horde. In the end, they succeeded in pushing back their immense numbers. However, the damage from the demon invasion took a heavy toll on the surrounding lands, with the loss of entire nations. The wave of refugees flooded the ruined streets of the recovering countries. At that time, people wondered if the world would ever recover from such a state, as many nations had fallen. Countries all over the world had suffered enormous losses. With the immediate threat gone, many nations faced civil unrest. They decided that the best course of action was to create a place where refugees could live and train, preparing for the next invasion. Each nation conducted research and developed different types of fighting styles and technologies. They built an academy and named it Salmonati Academy, creating Alkazam as a place where people could develop their research together. Back to their peaceful lunch, it seemed Iris and Somya were arguing over which was cuter. In contrast, Nosumu just observed the two sisters discussing such things. When the two sisters realized what they were doing, they immediately apologized to Nosumu. Somya was curious about how her sister and Nosumu had met. Nosumu said that they had just met by chance. However, Iris told her everything, saying she had met Nosumu during a battle where he had slashed a demon bear in less than a second. Iris continued, saying that Thelma had been on the verge of being attacked. But thanks to Nosumu, she was saved. Nosumu tried to say that it wasn't exactly true, but Iris insisted that it was. It seemed he wasn't confident in his skills. He said he was the lowest-ranked student in the school because of his suppressed abilities. However, Iris thought that was strange, wondering how he could create so many blades and still be the lowest rank. It was an attack too powerful to be used in the academy, and he had been warned that it was potentially lethal. He needed to train his physical body to its limits, but because of his suppressed abilities, his magic was very low. He could only attack once with his current power, which included a lack of enhancement factors, something that didn't help much. Iris tried to confirm that if he used an enhancement factor, he could only fight one more time. She asked why he didn't join a party. Nosumu honestly replied that no one wanted to team up with him because of his suppressed abilities. However, Iris thought that wasn't the only reason. She said she wasn't sure, but that he didn't need to be strong to join a party. Just knowing his way around the forest was enough to improve his position. When he asked her why she thought so, Iris explained that after leaving them, he must have gone deep into the forest alone. The forest is an extremely dangerous place, teeming with monsters. It's not a place for the inexperienced and unskilled. Iris had no idea that the reality was far from what she imagined. Nosumu had actually stayed the night with Chino, which was one of the safest places in the forest. Even so, he had still spent countless lonely nights in the forest, because Chino would sometimes throw him out at night. Iris asked why he didn't start his own party. Was it because of his breakup with Lisa, or because of the hatred from the other students? Or was there some other reason? Hearing Iris's question, bad memories flooded back to Nosumu. Noticing he was taken aback by the sudden question, Iris tried to explain that she didn't mean to hurt him. She didn't know the truth about that fight and wasn't one to make assumptions about uncertain things. However, Nosumu couldn't take the question so lightly. He respectfully asked to be excused. As he left, Iris explained to Somya that Nosumu wasn't well liked by the students at the academy, perhaps due to his lack of success. He was seen as worthless at school. Iris, being at the top of the social ladder, was always respected. She couldn't possibly understand Nosumu's feeling of being ostracized and bullied. There was a distinct pain in him and a deep lack of confidence, something only those who have been hurt can feel. This was the first time Iris's words had been rejected, and it was beyond anything she had imagined. She hadn't thought deeply enough about the situation and was clearly not ready for this outcome. Iris slowly realized that she might have said too much and thought she had done something wrong. Her sister Soumya thought it would be best to apologize to Nosumu, and Iris agreed with that, but also not to get too close. Camilla's actions made Nosumu uncomfortable, but he tried to remain calm. The feeling of loneliness washed over him as he realized his old friends had now turned their backs on him. Nosumu continued down the path in the forest, where he often went to train and escape reality. The pain from training helped him regain his composure, but a part of him still wanted to go back and see what Iris had to say. However, he knew he needed to focus on his training to push that pain away. Lisa wasn't the only one who abandoned him. When the rumors started to spread, most of his friends left without hesitation, which broke his heart. Even so, Nosumu didn't think it was a big deal, because he didn't want to get tangled up in negative emotions. On his way back to school, he happened to run into two old friends, but Camilla Wojtaknos started an argument with him, saying he shouldn't talk to them as if they were close. Camilla was known as Lisa's first best friend since she came to the academy. She had also been friends with Nosumu during their first year, but was the one who rejected him the quickest and most completely when the rumors began to spread. Nosumu had tried countless times to prove his innocence, but every effort was in vain. Those around him rejected his pleas, causing his heart to gradually grow cold. Over time, the only thing he wanted was to clear up this misunderstanding, but they never gave him a chance to speak and defend himself, so he gave up. Nosumu began to bury the pain deep inside and fell deep into his own abyss. He rejected the idea that he could set things right again and focused only on recovering his mental state. In the end, however, he only ended up making the situation worse. His mind was shaken by the pain that had shattered his emotional balance. His emotions swung back and forth like a storm. Nosumu tried to be as friendly as possible, but it seemed like no one around him wanted to be near him at all. The moment Lisa stood up and left, his old friend started blaming Nosumu. In the end, he found himself training again to soothe the pain. Fortunately, his suicidal thoughts had lessened. After that, he met Iris and then ran into Lisa again. All the suppressed emotions came flooding back to him. He was so preoccupied that he didn't realize he had wandered into the deeper parts of the forest. There were many demons in the forest, and this was the first time something had caused a problem with his compass. There were many ways to find demons in the forest, but his hiding spot was hardly safe enough. So he thought he could build a shelter and wait for the fog to clear. But before he could carry out his plan, something happened that immediately made him stop in disbelief. No matter how you looked at it, this place didn't seem to be anywhere near Alakazam. While trying to soothe his pain, he had gotten lost in the forest again. Nosumu stumbled upon a creature he never expected to meet that day, a dragon with overwhelming power and an absolute presence. This was the first time he had faced a creature that should have vanished into history and legend. Realizing he stood no chance of winning, Nosumu decided to make a run for it. However, before he could take a single step, the dragon attacked him, forcing him to find cover. Fortunately, he had the weapon he often used in the forest to escape from monsters. This weapon was called Aim. It was the light he had pursued to reach this place. However, the dragon could destroy a person with its roar alone. In the next moment, all sound vanished as it aimed its fireball. The hill where the dragon landed had become a massive crater, large enough to swallow the entire Solmanati Academy. With that, Nosumu had no choice but to use spirit magic. The magic of spirits was different from that of non-spirits, as it didn't need to be processed elsewhere and could be activated the moment the spirit decided to use it. Compared to other types of magic, spirit magic was far faster. As he fought the dragon, Nosumu's life began to flash before his eyes. as his eyes slowly turned black from exhaustion. In those flashbacks, he reflected that all he ever wanted was to support Lisa's dream. At least that's what he thought. And while he still believed that, he also realized that his master, despite being somewhat crude, was undeniably a good person. The doctor and the teachers at school also cared deeply for him. Even though Iris had tried to convince him she wouldn't judge someone based on rumors, he still thought she would. In the end, this was what Nosumu hated most about himself, jumping to conclusions. But none of that mattered anymore, as he now truly stood on the brink of death. But before the worst could happen, his master, Chino, rushed onto the scene. She explained that she'd lost sight of him in the fog and had started searching for him in the forest. And it seemed he was in a dire situation, as she always ended up defeating magical beasts that were too strong for him to handle. However, with its 5 differently colored rings and unmistakable jet black body, it was none other than the Black Dragon King. She never thought she'd have to face a monster with a legendary title at her age. Upon hearing that this was the Black Dragon King, Nosumu was in shock. Chino went on to explain that the dragon's name was Tiamat. About 5,000 years ago, it began to devour its own kind and was eventually sealed away by them. The Black Dragon King even ate its own brethren and was feared as a heretic among heretics. It was a legendary dragon that had vanished from the earth 5,000 years ago when it was sealed. Therefore, to encounter such a divine creature made Nosumu truly unfortunate. When Chino checked on him, it seemed Nosumu's organs had been injured. So she ordered him to flee while she kept the monster distracted. Nosumu asked about the monster, and Chino continued, saying that if they stayed together, they wouldn't be able to escape. So Nosumu should run and not look back. Although Nosumu didn't want to leave her, it seemed Chino was truly determined to help the poor boy, no matter the cost. Somehow she was managing. From the very beginning, with a single strike, she cut through 5 beams of light. And with that opening, she destroyed another 10 beams. Next, she shattered an attack of 20 beams, but the waves of light kept coming, with no sign of stopping the dragon's assault. She no longer had the strength in her hands, so she began using her blade. Eventually, the power of the beams began to increase. She could still slice through them, but the number she could block with a single strike started to decrease. The impact of her rapidly draining stamina was becoming clear. Chino knew her past self couldn't have handled this, even at her best. She couldn't imagine defeating such a creature. The muscles in her arms began to ache, and she started to lose control of her body. Extreme exhaustion and a loss of sensation began to set in. Her sense of taste vanished, and even the smell of the burning beams was gone. Her arms and skin grew numb as if anesthetized, and the sound of the exploding beams began to fade. Even her vision began to fail. By this point, she knew she was on the verge of death, but despite that, she still found a positive spin on the situation, telling herself that at least this way, she could be free of her foolish student, Nosumu. However, she didn't know why her heart felt so empty. It seemed she had enjoyed her time with Nosumu more than she'd expected. That's why if she managed to save him, it wouldn't be so bad after all. However, it appeared Nosumu was just as stubborn as she was. Chino was surprised to see Nosumu call out her name, as she had expected him to run away. But it seemed Nosumu was determined to help his master at any cost. When he unleashed his chi technique, Light Destroyer, the chi he sent through the ground erupted beneath the enemy's feet, launching them into the air to be annihilated by its power. Of all the chi techniques Chino possessed, this one had the greatest range of power. It was a special type of chi technique. However, due to the sudden drop in his chi, its power was lost. Though Nosumu tried to fight the dragon at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing his own life, he gave it his all for his master. As he vomited blood, Chino worried for her student's safety. It seemed his body temperature suddenly began to drop, and his body was enveloped in the breath of death. The pain was worse than ever before. He was attacked, and the blood loss began to impair his brain function, leaving him without enough strength for even a flashback. At that moment, Nosumu began to wonder if this was his final price. The cold reality crashed down on him, and his refusal to die awakened his power. The stagnant ice in his heart began to melt, as he told himself that he still didn't want to die. He didn't want to give up now. After everything he had been through, from being bullied by his classmates to being broken up with by his girlfriend, Nosumu had never given up. So why should he give up now? If you strip away all the reasons and the desire to escape from a cruel reality, the only thing that emerges is the desperate will to live. As a result, even though his entire body was now in agony, he would burn the last moments of his life in search of light. An intense feeling of being alive exploded within him. Nosumu focused on his sword to the absolute limit, fighting the dragon with all his might. The pain he felt gradually went numb as he was now completely focused on his goal, which was to kill the Dragon King and survive. Nosumu felt time passing faster. However, he felt it was still too slow, so he sped up. He told himself that it had always been this way, that his own slowness was what made things worse. It was as if his entire body was bound by metal chains, preventing him from moving forward. These invisible chains gave off a faint light, making them the cause of his failure. But now, Nosumu was determined to do whatever it took to make sure he won. It was only a matter of time before they found out what would happen next. Would he win this fight, or would this be the end for him? There was no way he could break these metal chains quickly, and the fact that these shimmering chains appeared out of nowhere must surely be a figment of his imagination. Even so, he was aware of their existence and was certain he could break free from them. Thanks to his extreme acceleration, the dragon lost sight of Nosumu for just a moment. Using the phantom blade, he tried to ensure he would win the fight, no matter what. The chi energy was compressed, thinner and sharper than a strand of hair, moving at the speed of a swinging sword. However, the attack couldn't slice through its cornea. Even though a dragon is a spiritual being, it still possesses a physical body, meaning it also has animal instincts. For example, when one of its sensory organs is attacked, it will try to protect it. Its defense mechanism is similar to that of humans and animals. Tiamat slammed down on the ground with enough force to cause a massive earthquake. However, in that moment, the ground collapsed beneath its feet. It seemed the dragon had stepped on an underground cave that had already existed below. Until now, Nosumu couldn't move freely due to the violent tremors, but he was able to protect himself from the impact of the fall. Tiamat was the king of spirits, beings capable of using extraordinary magic, equivalent to spiritual magic. Before Nosumu could even take 3 steps, Tiamat began chanting a spell, hoping to obliterate him. Nosumu, who had broken free from the chains of his suppressed abilities, dashed forward at high speed. Light Destroyer helped Nosumu accelerate, pushing back some of the surrounding impact and deflecting the light rays, creating a path between Nosumu and Tiamat. Nosumu was exhilarated, his determination to fight and defeat this Dragon King on full display. He moved faster than anyone Chino had ever seen, leaving her stunned that her supposedly weak student was capable of such a feat. However, the dragon wouldn't give up easily. Its breath was also considered spiritual magic, which could be activated without a magic circle or chant. Tiamat grew enraged by the weak human's resistance and went berserk, wanting to destroy the world it was trapped in. It began to channel all its power into its 5 colored wings. Chino was stunned to see those shimmering wings, as she had never witnessed anything like it in her life. Now, the question was whether they could defeat a monster like that. In the end, it was only a matter of time before everything became clear. It was also said that the world was created to seal Tiamat. Whenever the dragon went astray, the world would try to seal its power. Of course, there would be a mechanism to restrain those powers. Tiamat, already weakened by the sealing process, was now only equivalent to an S-rank adventurer. Although Nosumu wasn't guaranteed to win this battle, he had no choice but to fight the Dragon King with all his might. Nosumu slashed at the scales under Tiamat's neck. The compressed chi in his blade exploded inside its throat. He swung his sword as if a path had opened up before him. Nosumu slashed at the exposed skin, using the momentum from the first strike. Despite being wounded, the great dragon was not yet defeated. With a roar that shook the ground, it tried to throw Nosumu off with all its remaining strength. Nosumu gripped his sword, which was stuck fast in the dragon's body, and focused his power into his right arm. In his near-death state, Nosumu declared that this would be the end for the Dragon King. Using his Chai ability, Light Destroyer, a stream of power equivalent to a high-level spell shot out from the sword. Nosumu's attack finally blew the dragon's head off, along with a cluster of nerve inside it. After this dramatic battle, Nosumu could now finally breathe after the relentless fight. Meanwhile, Chino was worried about her student. Nosumu was once again lost in the thought that the dragon had many similarities to him. Both were trapped and restrained by their own power. The question was whether he could break free from the state or if he would forever remain a low-ranking student that everyone at school avoided. After the intense battle, Nosumu woke up, covered in bruises and injuries. The moment he opened his eyes, Chino's face immediately greeted him, leaving him completely shocked. But Chino was overjoyed and relieved that her student was finally alive and conscious. Chino explained that she had been tending to Nosumu's wounds for 3 whole days, and this was the thanks she got. Although it only felt like about 10 minutes had passed, in reality, 3 days had gone by since the fight with Tiamat. There was no other furniture besides the bare essentials for daily life. The simple room where he was recovering was Chino's cabin. She apologized, realizing she had used too much chi, but it was nothing to worry about, she reassured Nosumu. For the past 3 days, she had been closely monitoring and treating his wounds. Chino informed him of his current condition and said there were a few things she needed to talk about. Nosumu braced himself for whatever Chino was about to say. She first told him what happened after the battle. Indeed, Nosumu had won, as he had defeated Tiamat in the sealed world. Nosumu, not knowing what the sealed world was, asked what she meant. Chino explained that it was a world created by dragons to imprison the Dragon King of Destruction. Although Tiamat was considered a legend, the story of the sealed world was even more obscure. Nosumu asked how they ended up in such a world. Chino went on to explain that another dragon might know the answer, but since they were human and not spirits, it wasn't easy for them to understand. Even so, Nosumu couldn't quite grasp the meaning of what Chino was telling him. Finally, she made it clear he had defeated Tiamat and absorbed its power, and now he was a dragon slayer, a true dragon slayer, the likes of which hadn't been seen in hundreds of years. After realizing what Chino truly meant, Nosumu couldn't believe what had just happened. He couldn't comprehend that he had now become a dragon slayer. Chino then said there was one more thing they needed to check. She handed Nosumu his katana. This sword was said to have originally belonged to her master. The moment Nosumu took the katana, Chino attacked him without hesitation. Nosumu, now completely bewildered, couldn't understand why his master would do such a thing. However, his reflexes were now better than before. Chino explained that after becoming a dragon slayer, his physical abilities had increased. She said she knew he had an aptitude for curved blades before, but because his abilities were restrained, his limited muscle strength greatly affected his agile movements. Previously, they had no choice but to cover this up with movement and breathing techniques. But now, a dragon slayer inherits the power of a dragon, making them much stronger, Chino continued, saying it was very likely this was what had happened to Nosumu. Although it might not seem like he had gotten any stronger, the effect of his restrained abilities was immense. His enhanced capabilities had been completely suppressed. Thinking back to the fight with the dragon, he had been able to free himself from that restraint. Chino asked if it was possible for him to do it again. Nosumu recalled the moment he found himself bound by his own abilities. He tried to break free, saying he wished for the chains binding him to shatter, but it seemed he was still struggling. Because of this, Chino thought her earlier speculation was probably correct. She had been thinking about this for a long time and felt that Nosumu had no reason to get stronger right now, not even to support the girl he loved. He might want to support her, but she wasn't his lover anymore. She didn't feel the same way he did. Therefore, Chino told Nosumu plainly that he needed to start letting go of the past. Chino also asked him if he was actually using the techniques she had taught at the academy, because from her observations, it seemed like Nosumu wasn't doing that at all. But Chino also said that was fine, since he didn't really need to use them against human opponents. If he used the phantom blade on a wooden scarecrow, everyone would know not to underestimate him. She also stressed that the sword style she taught was rare on this continent. If he mastered it, he wouldn't have to fall to rock bottom. At least the only reason for him to fall so low would be if he couldn't face reality and gave up. Saying it was all for Lisa's sake, he had stayed at the academy just practicing his swordsmanship. The fact that he never even tried to see the person who should have been at the center of his problems was proof of this. It seemed Nosumu wasn't looking at the present at all. He was still stuck in the past, bound by her memory. So, Chino continued, even if she suddenly asked him to decide his future, she was sure he wouldn't be able to think of anything quickly. She wanted him to focus on recovering from his injuries. Eventually, he would be forced to make a decision. She also doubted he'd be able to return to town safely with these injuries. That's why she suggested he continue resting at the cabin for the rest of the day. After all, he had fought very well. Chino then hugged Nosumu, showing her pride as an instructor that her student was finally making progress. Because Chino was so close to him, she could see all of his shortcomings. However, this actually made Nosumu feel more at ease. As he drifted back to sleep, Chino thought to herself that she never would have expected this kid to become the first dragon slayer to appear in hundreds of years. That's why he deserved to sleep well, because both his body and mind surely needed rest after that intense battle. How much strain had his mind endured? The level of exhaustion he must have gone through was unimaginable, so he truly deserved this rest. It is said that Chino was not born in any country on the Archimel continent, but on a distant eastern island nation, as the second daughter of the head family, famous for the Mikagura sword style. She was able to learn swordsmanship in the best possible environment from a young age. Chino absorbed all her skills through practice, and in the blink of an eye, her talent blossomed. Although some had criticized her for wielding a sword as a woman, her father still trained her as she wished, while her mother also supported her ambitions. Moreover, her older sister always loved her and stood by her side. Every one of her battles ended in victory, and her glorious military service was praised by all. She was even given awards and commendations from the highest nobility in the country. This was when the older sister she loved and respected introduced her to a young man who would soon become her student. Chino experienced love, which blossomed quickly after they confirmed their feelings for each other. They were engaged as a prestigious family, unmatched in strength and honor, with a wonderful proposal that could be called true love. She was at the peak of her happiness. However, as she was about to offer the wedding sack to her husband, a baseless accusation of adultery was shouted out, throwing the wedding ceremony into chaos. Because of the false evidence, the engagement was annulled. Of course, Chino insisted on her innocence, but no one would listen to her. A year later, she discovered the identity of the person who had framed her. It was none other than the older sister she loved most. Her sister didn't want her to be happy in life, so she decided to take everything away from Chino. After discovering the truth, she left her hometown, her country, and everything on the island, eventually traveling to Bascom Forest, a strange land untouched by humans. She lived there, without interacting with anyone. That's why, when she first met Nosumu, she saw herself in him. However, they had more in common than people thought, having been abandoned in a similar way. At first, Chino hated how Nosumu reminded her of her past self, but now she felt a surge of sadness when she looked at Nosumu. Chino said she was very tired and couldn't recover, instead just feeling her strength being washed away and disappearing. Those who suffer from this illness gradually lose their chi, their life force, until they pass away. The cause is pushing past one's limits and damaging the core of the body, where life force is sustained. There have only been a few cases of people recovering from the death-sleep illness, but a cure has yet to be identified. Looking at Nosumu, Chino thought there was still so much she wanted to tell him. During their time together, she had only taught him sword techniques, but she had one last thing she wanted to say, and until then, she would use all her strength to make it happen. Even during training, the medicines from her pouch that she used to treat his injuries didn't heal him instantly like store-bought potions, but instead enhanced the body's natural healing ability without overtaxing it. Nosumu realized that Chino had been acting stranger than her usual self. She had always been a grumpy old woman, but for the past few days, she had been overly concerned about Nosumu, which he found really strange. Now, she had even followed him back to the city. It turned out Chino had never visited Alcazam, and it seemed she didn't really want to see the place. However, she might regret it if she didn't come sooner. With that, Nosumu offered to show her around the city. Chino asked if that was really okay, since he had been absent from school for about a week, which could get him into trouble if he didn't return right away. Nosumu reassured her that he had everything under control, so she didn't need to worry at all. After that, the two immediately began to explore the city, and Chino was amazed by everything in the market. After a little stroll through town, Nosumu took her to the school. There, Chino said goodbye to him, but before returning to the forest, she told Nosumu to come back to her cabin right after school, as she still had more to tell him. Confused at first, Nosumu eventually agreed, since he was now late for his exam. The final exams at Salmonati Academy, the results of the practical and written tests were the main deciding factors for a student's rank next year. If a high-ranking student scored poorly, they would be demoted to a lower rank, and if their scores didn't meet the minimum requirement, they would be held back, or worse, expelled from the academy. For Nosumu, who usually got low scores, this was a huge problem. When Nosumu arrived at his first class, no one really bothered to ask what had happened to him. However, it seemed Ms. Henry wasn't going to let it slide. Nosumu just claimed that bears had attacked him, but he defeated them. As for his absence, he said he was sick with a fever, so he couldn't come to school for the past week. Saying all this to one of his favorite teachers made Nosumu feel even sadder for having to lie. He felt it was wrong to lie, but he couldn't tell her the truth that a dragon had attacked him. However, it seemed Miss Henry took this to heart, saying that Nosumu didn't want to tell her anything because he didn't really trust her. She tried to act cute to convince Nosumu to spill everything. Nosumu felt nervous before Ms. Henry's dangerous beauty, making him feel like he could tell her anything. But he tried not to be persuaded. Meanwhile, Iris was with Sonia and Thelma, and it seemed Sonia was asking her sister if she had cleared up the misunderstanding with Nosumu. Thelma, who knew nothing about what had happened, asked Iris about it. Iris then explained that Nosumu had a misunderstanding before, and she had been waiting for him every lunch. However, it seemed he had been absent all week. Seeing Iris act like this made everyone suspicious, because she had never been so interested in a male student like this before. That said, Sonia asked her sister if they could invite Nosumu to her birthday party. At first, Iris was a little hesitant, but after a while, she decided she would invite him after they had cleared up all the misunderstandings. Meanwhile, the teaching assistant Henri often participated in classes like this and provided direct support when needed. Although the 10th years are only assigned one assistant, the first years have more. During the afternoon practical sessions, there are demonstrations like the ritual magic one from the other day, and finally, mock battles. Looks like Nosumu and Mars are fighting again. Nosumu decided not to unleash the discomfort from his dream just yet. He felt that something inside him would shatter, as with the cheat techniques he learned from his master. Because of that, he wondered if he should even use them. The match began, and that's all for today.